For New Orleans Saints quarterbacks Jake Haener and Spencer Rattler, winning QB2 isn't even half the battle in our 53-man roster projection. We got all that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I am your host, your friend, Ross Jackson, New Orleans native, your New Orleans Saints expert and credentialed member of the media covering those New Orleans Saints as the Saints beat writer over at LouisianaSports.net, which is now live, so come check us out. You can also find me as a Saints analyst over on WWL TV. On today's episode of Locked On Saints, it's our 53-man roster projection. We're going to burn through this one. We're going to take a look at the cornerback 5 battle and the safety battle, why right now it's a tough decision at both spots. We're also going to take a look at Bub Means holding on for a spot amongst the wide receivers, but of course we got to figure out what happens with Kendre Miller first. And we'll also kick everything off here with a look at the quarterback 2 battle and why winning the battle is only step 1 for Haener and Rattler. We got that coming up for you as we continue on with today's episode. We appreciate you very much for making us your first listen of the day every day, for being an everydayer here on the show, which is a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. FanDuel right now through September 22nd has an awesome offer. All FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started today. 4. Spencer Rattler and Jake Haener, yes, they are right now laying down their case to not only be the Saints QB2, but to put themselves in position to be considered as the future of the franchise, the quarterback of the future. Remember that this battle isn't just about who gets to go over the screenshots taken during a game on the sideline with Derek Carr. That's not the end goal for either of these guys. They're trying to play themselves into the position to become Derek Carr's successor, to become the face of this franchise. And I wonder if the New Orleans Saints have 2 different plans in mind for their 2 quarterbacks. That's the way that I looked at it when it came to my 53-man roster. So let's start to break this down. When it comes to quarterback, this is simple. It's Derek Carr, it's Jake Haener, it's Spencer Rattler, and it's Taysom Hill because technically his position designation is quarterback, so we have to put him in that number. Jake Haener, I believe, will end up being the team's backup quarterback going into 2024 because of the familiarity that he already has with Derek Carr, the relationship that he has with Derek Carr, all of that. But beyond that, these 2 guys, Jake Haener and Spencer Rattler, are going to continue to compete all season long in practice and then next year's training camp all over again to be able to make sure that they're a part of the conversation for quarterback of the future. And I promise you, those 2 quarterbacks will not be the only quarterbacks that will be amongst that conversation when the time comes for the New Orleans Saints to figure out the direction that they're going with Derek Carr. So this battle doesn't end this Sunday with the game against the Tennessee Titans. It will wage on for at least another season and off season. And I almost guarantee that there will be another face at some point introduced to that competition or potentially coming in and nixing the competition as a whole. The way that I look at it, Jake Haener can be your backup quarterback for 2024, and you can focus on Spencer Rattler as your potential quarterback of the future, or vice versa. It does not matter. And being a backup quarterback certainly does not stop you from being considered in that conversation either. So I think that this team will continue to drive this competition for quite a while, but I expect that I expect that Haener will come out on top because of his relationship, not just because of his relationship. He's also had a good camp. But he will be boosted by his relationship with the head coach and his relationship with the starting quarterback as it is. All right, let's move on here to offensive line. I wanted to go to offensive line next. I know typically you go like, oh, quarterback, running back, wide receiver. I'm not going in order. We're going by what's most important. So we got quarterback out of the way. Now let's discuss offensive line, where I do think that there are not only battles in terms of who makes the roster, but there's battles in terms of who ends up starting on this offensive line. We know 3 things for sure. Erik McCoy, Cesar Ruiz, and Taliesin Fuanga. We know those 3 guys for sure. Erik McCoy will be your starter at center. Cesar Ruiz will be your starter at right guard. And then, of course, Taliesin Fuanga, who returned to practice in team drills yesterday, will be the starter at left tackle. That seems pretty much set in stone at this point. barring anything unforeseen that ends up forcing some changes there. The spots that are up for grabs are, of course, left guard as well as right tackle. Now, lately, we've seen depth player Oli Udoh step in and start to take some of those first-team right tackle spots, but Dennis Allen, New Orleans Saints head coach, has been very clear that Penning, he believes, still has the edge for the moment. Let's see if he retains that edge as he goes through. I do think that Udoh's performances have been stronger at the right tackle spot outside of the guard spot. It's almost like I've been screaming that for 4 weeks. But not only that, I think his performance has gotten stronger, period. The big issue that we've seen so far with Oli Udoh has been false starts holding penalties has been the big thing. So that's the one thing that you're probably going to have to quell some concerns around if you're the New Orleans Saints for yourself. But I do think that Oli Udoh has a good chance to potentially push. But right now, I'll give Trevor Penning the edge because that's what coach says is happening. And I think that Lucas Patrick has the edge at left guard, although he's seen a lot of competition there. It's been Lucas Patrick. They started with Nick Saldiveri. We've seen Kyle Hergel there. We've seen Shane Lemieux there. We've watched other guys. We've watched actually Landon Young and Oli Udoh end up taking snaps there as well. So I think Lucas Patrick's going to come out on top, and that will be your starting 5. So that gives us 5 of our 8. Taliesin Fuanga at left tackle, Lucas Patrick at left guard, Eric McCoy at center, Cesar Ruiz at right guard, and then Trevor Penning at right tackle. Here's where I think the Saints go for their depth, because I do have them keeping 9 offensive linemen, because you just can't get enough depth on this offensive line, if you ask me. I think they go with versatile players like Landon Young, Oli Udoh, and Kyle Hergel. Those guys cover all 5 of your bases. And then I wouldn't blame them for holding on to an additional offensive lineman, particularly somebody that's got a little bit of experience like a Tremaine Ankrum, somebody that can come in and, be able to be somebody that's kind of that 9th offensive lineman, give you some additional depth. Now, you might be wondering, Ross, where's Nick Saldiveri in all this? Well, I have Saldiveri being placed on injured reserve, thanks to a new rule by the NFL this offseason, and I believe it was the Lions that actually proposed this, so really thanks to the Lions. The NFL now has a new rule where a club can place 2 players on injured reserve on the day of roster cuts, and then they can still come back 4 games later like a typical IR move, as opposed to, because it's technically the preseason still, them being done for the year. Used to be that you would have to carry a player over to your 53-man roster and then move them to injured reserve. It feels like Nick Saldiveri could be one of the 2 candidates to take advantage of this new rule, be a little bit crafty, get your offensive line set, and still have Nick Saldiveri be a guy that can come back to you later on in the season if he's not going to be ready to go at the very beginning. If he does end up exceeding whatever timeline we kind of expect him to be on at this point, just because we haven't seen much progress from him doesn't mean that there hasn't been progress, then of course he and Tremaine Ankrum you can easily swap in this equation to still walk away with 9 offensive linemen, which I do think would be very valuable for this New Orleans Saints team because, again, you just can't have enough depth. So that's the way that I look at things going for quarterback and offensive line, 2 of the biggest conversations of this entire offseason. But we'll see. I think that quarterback is still active right now. I think right tackle could still be active right now. And maybe this final preseason game against the Tennessee Titans changes that. I don't think that this final game changes who makes the roster. I think the team has a pretty good idea of who that's going to be at this point. Sans maybe 1 or 2 guys that could potentially swap around. But I do think that jostling for position on that roster is still available to these players. And guys like Jake Haener and Spencer Rattler, as well as guys like Oli Udoh and Trevor Penning, have the opportunity to take advantage of that this weekend. Up next, Kendre Miller is probably going to be given another chance. We got that coming up for you as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. What are your self-care non-negotiables? Maybe you never skip a day at the gym. You love you some leg day. For me, it's therapy day. Never want to skip therapy day. It can be tough sometimes to kind of make time for the things that make you feel good. Even when we know what it is that makes us feel good, it's tough to make time to actually go out there and do it. We're all busy. You get it. That's why I love BetterHelp, because they make therapy convenient, accessible, which I think is really important in today's day and age, as well as, of course, something that's affordable. And that's what I love about BetterHelp. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited specifically to your schedule. No traffic, no waiting rooms. You just log on. You can do video calls. You can do phone calls. You can do text chats. There's so many different ways for you to be able to communicate with somebody that can kind of help you get that mental leg day, if you will. So never skip a therapy day with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon to get 10% off of your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. The New Orleans Saints running back Kendre Miller could be given another shot, but the Saints themselves could be crafty about how they choose to produce that second chance. We appreciate you very much for being here for another episode and for making us your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget to go and check out the Locked On Fantasy Football podcast as well for your second listen today. Vinny Iyer and Michelle Majuk making you the smartest fantasy football player in your league because they are two of the smartest people I've ever talked to. So make sure you go and check them out over on Locked On Fantasy Football, wherever you get your podcast, and on YouTube, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So what are the New Orleans Saints going to do with Kendre Miller? It's the question that everyone's asking. And I've thought about being crafty, The Saints can give him another chance. And I think it's likely that they do. I think it's likely that Kendre Miller gets another chance. He's a third-round rookie. He was a third-round pick, second-year player, not a rookie. But didn't really have a rookie season, right? Kind of got injured against Chicago, missed a lot of time, and then ended up playing in that last Week 18 game, and then looked really good that Week 18 game, and everybody went, oh, I get it. And then we were all excited about him coming into the 2024 season, the new system, the wide zone system. Yeah, he was going to have to learn a bit of that outside zone game, but he should be fine. And then he goes down with a hamstring injury during individual practices, day one of training camp, and never to be seen again. That's not true. He has been seen, but never to practice again, right? We haven't seen him out on the field yet. And so Dennis Allen saying that basically since the moment that they drafted him, they don't have any new information on him, and that makes it really tough to make a roster. And I get that. I understand that. But you did invest in this guy. And it's not impossible for you to carry 4 running backs. And that's exactly what I have the New Orleans Saints doing so that they can provide Kendre Miller another opportunity once he's healthy. If he doesn't stay healthy, if he doesn't take advantage of that opportunity, then you can move on. But as of right now, no harm, thanks to the versatility of a Taysom Hill, really, in keeping a 4th running back on this roster. And sometimes I've said that, and people have asked me, you can't keep 4 running backs. Why? Give me one good reason. Says who? Says who? Says whomst? Nobody. Nobody cares. The San Francisco 49ers, where Clint Kubiak just came from last year, kept 5. They kept 5 running backs and 6 wide receivers. You can keep 4 running backs. You'll be fine. So that's what I expect the New Orleans Saints to do. Alvin Kamara, Jamal Williams, Kendre Miller, and Jordan Mims. Yeah, it's Jordan Mims season, everybody. Time to just enjoy it, embrace it, and watch it. Let it wash over you. It's fantastic. I cannot wait. I'm excited to see what it is that this running back room is able to do with their new running back system, or their new run game system, run focused system. I think it's going to be good. Now, here's the sacrifice, all right? You keep 4 running backs. And look, if the Saints wanted to be crafty here, they could take Kendre Miller, and they could also make him the second preseason IR guy designated to return at roster cuts, right? We talked about how they could do that with Nick Saldiveri. Well, they've got 2 players that they could do that with. So Kendre Miller could be an option. Keep him out for 4 weeks and then bring him back, give him some more time for his hamstring to do whatever it needs to do to be healthy. And then boom, there you go. Activate the practice window. Then he's got 3 more weeks to practice if he wants to before being activated back to the active roster. Gives you a little bit of flexibility. Certainly a way that the New Orleans Saints could go about that. But if they choose not to do it that way because they think that Kendre Miller is going to be healthier sooner than those first 4 games, then this is the way to do it. You carry the 4 running backs. You might make a little bit of a sacrifice because you could drop an offensive lineman to make this spot, or because of the versatility of Taysom Hill, as I referenced earlier, you could drop the fullback. And this is what the New Orleans Saints did last year. They did not carry a fullback into their initial 53-man roster. Instead, they put Adam Prentice on the practice squad, elevated him for a few games. You can do that for 3 games before a player has to be put on your active roster. And then boom, elevate him to your active roster. That should be long enough for you to figure out where things are with Kendre Miller. And if he's looking healthy and he's looking good, then you work on getting Jordan Mims back to your practice squad or somebody else back to your practice squad. Doesn't necessarily have to happen at the position. Could happen somewhere else. Could happen on the defensive side. Doesn't matter. And so having that fullback spot open, but still being able to employ that fullback by elevating him for 3 preseason games or 3 regular season games, having Taysom Hill who can play fullback for you, having Foster Moreau you can put in the backfield if you want to. There was one look that the Saints showed during training camp where they had Foster Moreau as a fullback and then Taysom Hill as a tailback. Sure, go for it. And then Dallin Holker has the ability to kind of play in that F move that F move kind of system or concept rather as well. So that's my thoughts on running back. I think Kendre Miller is going to get another chance. It's just about how the New Orleans Saints want to give him that chance by putting him on the active roster or giving him the 4 weeks on that new IR rule and then being able to bring him back after that. Wide receiver, I think Bub Means makes a case for a spot here over the course of this week. It's been tough, this wide receiver room. For a long time, you didn't have anybody really standing out behind the two locks, Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed. Now, as time has progressed, things have moved forward, which is good. And I think you've got 4 locks now. You've got Chris Olave, you've got Rashid Shaheed, and then there's Cedric Wilson and A.T. Perry. And then I think Bub Means gets the edge as a drafted player. I just think that that's one of those things we've seen the New Orleans Saints do in the past. And yeah, you might as well. And so Bub Means, though, not only just because he's a drafted player, but he's shown some things since he's come back from his, I think it was a shin injury, lower leg injury, that kept him out during a good portion of training camp. I think he's shown some nice things. Solid route runner, knows where to be and when to be there, making some contested catches, things like that. So I think that he also earns a spot. But the thing that's tough is that guys like Kevin Austin Jr., who I've praised on this show, Stanley Morgan Jr., who gives you great special teams acumen, and then Samson Nacua, who probably has been the best receiver not named A.T. Perry, Cedric Wilson, over the course of, and then of course your 2 starters, but I'm talking about the guys that are kind of below your 2 big guys in Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed. But Samson Nacua has probably been your best performer at the position outside of, the top guys. And they only played him 9 snaps in the second game, so they trying to hide him? Like, what's going on there? So that almost to me feels like that's trying to sneak him to the practice squad kind of move. So we'll see exactly what goes on there. But I think Kevin Austin has had strong practices, but hasn't been able to show up in games. Which one's more important for the Saints? I know which one's more important for me. For me, it's practices. I want to see you do it in practices. And then I need to see you do something in games, right? I need to see you do something there. But I also need to see you be able to take notes, get better, and progress in practice. Like, that's a big thing for me. But that might just be the theater in me that feels that. Now, the Saints could go so far as keeping 6 wide receivers if they want to. That opens up another spot for maybe a core special teamer. Maybe the kickoff rules change this. Maybe instead of keeping 9 offensive linemen, you keep 8 offensive linemen, you keep a 6th wide receiver. That could open the door for a Stanley Morgan Jr. who contributes on special teams, or even an Equanimeous St. Brown who's a good blocker. Good opportunity there. But for me right now, it's Olave, Shaheed, Wilson Jr., Perry, and Means for the time beings. I think that changes, though, if Kevin Austin has a really good preseason game against the Tennessee Titans. I will tell you that. That's one spot that I feel like still is kind of in flux based on this final preseason game in terms of making the roster and not making the roster. And in that case, you might see them keep 6 because I don't know if they want to move on from Bub Means so quickly as a drafted player. Finally, tight ends. This is simple. It's Juwan Johnson. It's Foster Moreau. It's Dallin Holker. Now, Dallin Holker is dealing with a sprained ankle right now. Does that end up impacting his opportunity to make the roster? Yes, it can have an impact. Maybe that's a place where Michael Jacobson ends up sneaking in. He's been a big-time red zone threat for this team. That's kind of nice. 6'6", big body dude. We've seen how that benefits the New Orleans Saints before. 6'7", big body dude for Jimmy Graham last year. But as of right now, Dallin Holker, who the team refers to as their 8th round pick, they love him. They love him. And so if they really feel as strongly as they say they do about Holker, it's hard for me not to put him on the roster. All right, coming up next, we're going to take a look at the cornerback and the safety battles, because those battles are now closing out, and it might be familiarity that gets the edge. We got that coming up for you next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode brought to you by friends at LinkedIn Jobs. When you're a small business, finding quality professionals that are right for your job is massively important, right? The success of your business can only be successful as the people that you employ to help make it, well, business. So that's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has all the tools to help you find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. So make sure you're getting the people with requisite experience, good culture fits for your team, all of those things. LinkedIn Jobs is going to give you all the tools to make that happen. In fact, LinkedIn Jobs is a place where 70% of users visit LinkedIn Jobs and don't even visit other job boards. So if you're not looking at LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. So join the army of 2.5 million small businesses that are already using LinkedIn for hiring today. You can post your job for free today at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. The cornerback battle for the 5th spot has been big. Rico Payton, so far, the undrafted free agent out of Pittsburgh State, has been a preseason stud. However, a late injury could potentially now open the door for a familiar face. We appreciate you very much for being here. Don't forget, we're going to be live later on today. We are your team every day, sometimes twice a day, most of the time twice a day. So you'll be able to catch us live after the New Orleans Saints practice in the Superdome. I'm excited to see the new 40-yard bars. Everybody loves a 40-yard bar, you know what I mean? They're in the Superdome. So we'll be checking it out. And of course, if you're at the Superdome practice later on today and you see me, as always, please say hi. All right, let's take a look at the New Orleans Saints cornerback room, because I think cornerback and safety, I kind of just want to look at the defensive backs as a whole, right? So I'm kind of lumping these two stories together, but they're the most intriguing stories over on the defensive side. We know the top four cornerbacks. It's Marshawn Lattimore, it's Paulson Adebo, it's Alontae Taylor, it's Kool-Aid McKinstry. I don't expect any changes in terms of what the structure of that is. Marshawn Lattimore, Paulson Adebo will start on the outside. Alontae Taylor, who has been the most improved player from 2023 to 2024, even though he was already really good in 2023, is going to be the starter in the slot. Kool-Aid McKinstry provides you some valuable depth because, as we always talk about here on the show, you are never going to have, no team is going to have all three of their starting corners for all 17 games, so his number will eventually be called. It's the fifth cornerback spot. We believe that they will keep a fifth corner at least. They typically keep around 11 defensive backs in total, 6 corners or 5 corners and 6 safeties, sometimes vice versa. And it depends on how you denote some players and things like that, but we'll get to that in just a moment. But the fifth cornerback spot, of course, has been a big one. I thought that Rico Payton was locking this job down. Fantastic preseason game against the Arizona Cardinals, followed up by a great practice week, followed up by a fantastic exhibition game against the San Francisco 49ers, but then he got the injury during the San Francisco 49ers, the shoulder issue that has kept him out of practice ever since then. And that injury could have potentially opened the door for a familiar face that people don't often remember is a familiar face in Shemar Jean-Charles. Shemar Jean-Charles joined the New Orleans Saints last year, week 12, and then actually was a big-time contributor over on the special teams side for the last 3 games of the season. This is a guy that has continued to make plays throughout training camp as well. I don't want to just limit him to being a special teams role player, but he does give you valuable depth on defense while also providing you somebody that's going to be able to contribute over on special teams. He was kind of the core gunner for the team when JT Gray was dealing with injury and stuff like that towards the end of the season. So a guy like Shemar Jean-Charles makes sense to be able to jump in to the spot. This is another place where I feel like the third preseason game matters. If Rico Payton, who was back out at practice yesterday, though did not participate in team drills, is out at practice today, participating in team drills, does the walkthrough on Saturday, gets checked out on Sunday and looks good, Rico Payton has an opportunity to go out there against Tennessee and lock this spot down. But I do think with the change in the kickoff rules, and of course with the emphasis that this team puts on special teams, a guy like Shemar Jean-Charles has a really nice inside track to this cornerback 5 spot. Safety, of course, also very interesting. You know, Tyrann Mathieu's on the roster. And honestly, I think you know the rest of the group. You're just trying to figure out who's going to actually start next to Tyrann Mathieu. I will stick with my pre-OTA, pre-minicamp, pre-whatever prediction that it'll be Jonathan Abram. Jonathan Abram is a box safety. That's what they're looking for to kind of complement, with some versatility, of course, but they're trying to complement Tyrann Mathieu. Jonathan Abram and Tyrann Mathieu closed out the 2023 season very strong in those final 2 games against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and the Atlanta Falcons. I think it's going to be hard for the New Orleans Saints to kind of shake that memory. Jordan Howden, very good away from the football, is developing when it comes to playing down in the box and being closer to the line of scrimmage. It's just not a part of his game yet. And so I don't know that he's ready yet. But I still think he makes the roster because they believe in him as the future at that position, as a part of the future at that position. So Tyrann Mathieu, Jonathan Abram, Jordan Howden, those are all guys that are absolute locks for you. JT Gray is a lock for you. I think not only will he be back, but he should be a special teams captain again, one of the two. And then I have Will Harris and Ugo Amadi making the roster because Harris and Amadi both give you some depth in the slot. Harris gives you depth at every basically secondary position, and Amadi gives you another core special teamer, returner, personal protector on the punt side, gunner, all of these other things. So I think that the Saints can keep 6 safeties because of the versatility that they have at the position. And even a guy like Millard Bradford, who can play a bunch of different places, who came in out of TCU as an undrafted free agent, likely to land on the practice squad, could potentially be elevated to help out on special teams and things like that as well. So I could see Harris, Gray, and Amadi being the guys behind your core 3 in Mathieu, Abram, and Howden. And look, I also don't expect, while I think that Jonathan Abram will end the season with the most snaps next to Tyrann Mathieu, I don't expect that he'll be the only one to take snaps next to Tyrann Mathieu during the 2024 season. I think based on the matchup, the game plan, and the game situation, maybe a Howden is better for a certain situation. Maybe a Harris is better for a certain situation. So you can always roll and kind of play the rotation game as well, which we've seen the Saints do on the secondary a ton under Dennis Allen. All right, we're going to wrap up here. Take a look at defensive line, linebackers, and specialists. No big surprises here. Defensive line we'll get through quickly. Cam Jordan, Carl Granderson, Chase Young, Peyton Turner, Isaiah Foskey. Those are your edge rushers. Colin Saunders, Nathan Shepard, Brian Brzee, Christian Boyd. Those are your defensive tackles. It's the same room as last year, minus Tano Passanio, who's on the physically unable to perform list. Maybe he'll be ready to come back at a later point in the season. But as of right now, Chase Young, Peyton Turner, Isaiah Foskey, those are the guys that come in, Chase Young being the new face. And then you swap out Malcolm Roach, who the Saints lost this offseason at defensive tackle, with Christian Boyd, who they drafted this offseason. All is well. Very, very simple in terms of what that looks like. Linebackers, I got the Saints keeping 5. Demario Davis, Pete Werner, Willie Gay. Those are Willie Gay Jr. Those are going to be your core 3. They'll be on the field a lot together. You'll see dime packages with 2 linebackers that are Demario Davis and Pete Werner, that are Demario Davis and Willie Gay, that are Pete Werner and Willie Gay. Like, they'll kind of shuffle all that around. The guys that I think hold down the depth right now, and this is with a caveat, Anthony Orji as well as Khaleke Hudson. I think both of these guys, I think Anthony Orji deserves to be on the roster. He's been one of the most improved players this offseason. Khaleke Hudson gives you special teams acumen, starting experience, all those good things, and honestly has looked impressive at certain points throughout camp. The big wrinkle here is DeMarco Jackson. DeMarco Jackson went down with a calf injury in Wednesday's practice while chasing down and trying to make a play, and he's made a lot of them this offseason. So if that calf injury holds Jackson back for a while, then it might be tough for him to steal a spot, or he gets on the initial roster, but then goes to injured reserve or something like that if the injury is serious enough, right? But if Jackson is ready to go by the time that the season comes and it was just like a weird kind of tweak or something like that, then I think you maybe swap him and Khaleke Hudson out, and then you try to get Khaleke Hudson to the practice squad or something like that, or you shave the numbers elsewhere. But that's my one caveat for that position. All right, so that wraps up the defense for us. Specialists, I'm not budging on specialists. I think it's Blake Grupe at kicker, it's Lou Hedley at punter, and then it's Zach Wood at long snapper. This is me predicting what the Saints will do. And I just don't see the Saints going away from their familiarity trend, even though they did it last year, so maybe I'm wrong. But the familiarity trend of not only keeping your kicker and your punter, who have more predictable, you have more predictable experience with, you also have the flexibility of Charlie Smith. You'll have to cut him and get him through waivers, but then you can get him back on your roster as a roster exemption, and then he sits there for a year for you. You can't use him, but he sits there for a year, and then he could potentially be your kicker of the future at a later time. But I think that this team is going to value consistency within 50 yards more than they're going to value a 65-yard kick when it comes to field goal. And I think that the New Orleans Saints have just been so cozy with Lou Hedley, and they feel like they have some predicting fashion with him in terms of predictability with him in terms of knowing where the ball is going to go location wise and all those other things, that I don't think they're going to disrupt that. And then the long snapper to holder to kicker operation, keeping that together obviously has its values as well. And Zach Wood might be the most secure player on an NFL team because he ain't going nowhere. And by the way, deserves the captain's badge again for a second season. All right, there you go. That's our 53-man roster. If you want to see it all written out, head over to louisianasports.net. So you can check it out. And then we'll do further breakdowns on this. I'm going to send some more takeaways over to our insider program as well. So if you want to join that, just text Saints or Who Dat to 504-285-7473. Join, you get film studies, exclusive Q&As, all that good stuff as well. And of course, we appreciate you for making us your first listen. Don't forget, we'll be back with you later on today as the New Orleans Saints wrap up their training camp with a final Superdome open practice. And please say hello if you're there. We appreciate you very much. As always, making Locked On Saints a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me on the show. As always, if you see me, please say hi. And if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you're living. Let me know how you're momming them. And trust Who Dat Nation, I'll holla at you.